Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello and welcome to Softcover, ThePrint's new platform to launch books online at a time when physical launches have become difficult due to the coronavirus pandemic. This will be the second launch in association with Harper Collins. The book we are launching today is titled Getting Competitive, A Practitioner's Guide for India. It is authored by Mr. R C Bhargava, the chairman of Maruti Suzuki India Ltd. Welcome, sir. Thank you so much for taking out time. Mr. Bhargava has spent nearly 4 decades with Maruti Suzuki India Ltd. And before that, he was an officer of the Indian Administrative Service. So he's seen literally both sides from the industry and the bureaucracy. So we will first unveil your book and then we'll get into a conversation. So, sir, this is the book, sir. Congratulations, sir, on your book.
Thank you. Looking good.
Yeah. So the book talks about how the Indian manufacturing industry still remains uncompetitive, and because of this, the share of India's manufacturing in GDP is only 15%. So what do you think went wrong?
A number of things have gone wrong, Rania. And one can understand that when one started in 1950, nobody had much knowledge or experience of how a country which had been under various kind of foreign rulers for centuries, and where there was a huge amount of poverty and deprivation and everything, would actually become a strong industrial country and also develop an equitable, socialistic type of society. Nobody knew that.
Right.
And therefore, in a sense, it was going to be a kind of trial and error system. But what I think really went wrong is that while we started by trying out systems which were based on the Soviet model of development, which at that time had a lot of currency everywhere, when we found things were not progressing as they should, nobody thought of applying the right kind of correctives and keep improving so that whatever were the shortcomings would get corrected and we would keep doing better and better. That, I think, is our biggest mistake, that we just didn't correct ourselves. We thought we started on something, irrespective of the results, we must continue on that route forever. That's never the way to do anything.
Right, sir. And obviously things changed once, the 1991 liberalization happened.
Sorry?
Obviously things changed once in 1991, once liberalization.
Because the original strategy which they adopted didn't really work out in the Indian situation. Actually, it didn't work out in the Soviet situation either, but that took a long time for people to realize. But in India, we knew, because we were so much more transparent and we were a democracy, as to what was happening. But why people didn't think that it was necessary to change course, make correctives? The objectives remain the same, but the way of achieving them should have been changed.
Right, sir. So how do you think the Narendra Modi government has done in the last 6 years to promote manufacturing? There have been a lot of announcements, but what has been your sense on the ground?
See, Prime Minister Modi correctly recognized that manufacturing is the key to India's future growth, for poverty removal, for creating an equitable society, and most importantly, for creating jobs for the people. And that's what his platform was right from 2014. He has taken a large number of measures to go in that direction. The whole ease of doing business, which has brought us down from somewhere around 140-something global ranking to 60-something. Now, that's a huge jump in a very short period of time. He has made a number of legal changes. 1,000+ laws, which are obsolete laws, have been abolished. The bankruptcy code has come in. The GST has come in. A whole lot of digital platforms have been built for taking decisions so that transparency comes into it. 6 years now, 6 years plus, there's been not a whiff of a scandal of any economic matter decision taken by the center. So these are big departures from what was happening in the past.
Right, sir.
But despite all of this, Rania, we still haven't got our manufacturing growth going at the rate which is required, because the Prime Minister correctly said that we must get to 25% of GDP by 2022. We are not going to get there because actually manufacturing growth has not picked up. And that is one of the things which bothered me, that if a leader like Mr. Modi has also tried and it's not come, there must be something more which needs to be done.
So what went wrong?
See, as you'll see from the book, there are a number of things which have not worked out so far. The most important is, I think, that while Mr. Modi can lay down the overall parameters of what we should do, and Jawaharlal Nehru did the same, the actual devising of the appropriate strategies, policies, laws, regulations is in the hands of the bureaucrats. Bureaucrats, including the economists and all those who advise with policies. This is not the job either of the Prime Minister or of the ministers to actually draft this kind of laws and regulations. This has to be done. And here I think throughout this period, the entire lot of policymakers do not understand really how industrial growth takes place, the importance of competitiveness in ensuring industrial growth, and even what is competitiveness. I don't think people understand the contents of competitiveness, how it is to be achieved. And if you don't understand that, then you'll keep doing things but not get to the crux of the matter, which is competitiveness. We as customers of products know that if the price of a product becomes cheaper and its quality improves, we are much more likely to buy it.
Right.
And the more the competitiveness in terms of better pricing, better quality, better performance, the more are the people who are going to buy that product. So if industrial growth is going to take place, the attempt of everybody concerned, which means the government as well as the industrialists, has to be to improve the quality of the goods which they manufacture, to reduce the prices, and to give customers a higher and higher value for money for that product. Now, that fundamentally is competitiveness, but it has other angles to it. If your price goes down and your quality goes up, you will be able to export that product also. Because globally, if your price is lower and your quality is as good as anything available in the world, people will buy your product. You don't have to do very much to sell it then. And therefore, you'll have a bigger market to produce and you'll have more production happening in the country. Also, in economics, there's a term called the price elasticity of demand, which links price decreases and increases with the increases and decreases in the volume of demand for a product. Now, if the price goes down, the volume goes up. But our taxation system has been such that we have considered that the way to socialism is to tax manufactured goods, not all of them, but most of them, at a much higher rate. Now, the result of that was that those goods became beyond the reach of the bulk of the people. Volumes remained low. Can't have industrial growth without demand, because factories and plants will produce only that much product as there is a market. You don't produce just to stock it somewhere in somebody's godown or somebody's shop.
Right. So, sir, the government, at least on the corporate tax side, they did reduce the rates, at least for new manufacturing companies to 15%, to existing companies to 25%. But on the GST side, I guess the rates still remain high, especially, if you're considered a so-called luxury good, then the rates are like 28% plus a cess. So, what you're talking about is mainly towards the GST side?
This is historical. It's not that this government has done it, but this sort of taxation has come down over decades. And because of revenue concentration and others, and the attitude of the bureaucrats and the civil servants and the economists in the government, nobody has ever thought that they should bring down the taxes to much, much lower levels, so that a huge demand for industrial goods is created and manufacturing can then pick up and go much faster. We've been trying hard since 1991, and that's what now almost 30 years, to get a lot of foreign investment into manufacturing. I've been part of delegations with ministers which have gone abroad. And we said, look at India, what a big market it offers. Look at our growing middle class. Come and invest in India. We have all that you need for investment. We have skilled manpower, we have resources, we have land, we have the market, everything. Yet people didn't come. The reason is, besides that it was not easy to do business here, these companies abroad do their own research. And they found that actually demand for products in India was growing very slowly. It was not as if India was a booming market and demand for refrigerators and whiteboards and brown boards and cycles and motorcycles and automobiles was growing by 20% a year. No. So in that small demand situation, they didn't think it worthwhile to invest in India.
So what you say is particularly holds true now, right? When India is seeing a contraction in demand, do you think it's a good idea that the government should reduce rates, especially the GST on many products to encourage demand?
See, if we had started on the right way, it would have been much easier. Today, the problem is that, and especially now, that there's a huge crunch of resources. And if today you were to reduce taxes, the question will be, how do you fund it? Because the demand for funds on government has gone up enormously for various reasons, including this whole migrant labor situation, including looking after people who have been laid off without jobs. Some amount of social security is necessary at this time. You can't do without it. Or the healthcare system and so many other extra costs have come up. So, and just now, for reasons other than just normal demand and supply, demand also for some products is coming up. But there are constraints in also increasing the manufacturing volumes of products. It's not as if today you have unlimited workers and you have no problems of the virus affecting workers and you can continue production. You can't do it. And it's very, very difficult to get back to your production which you were doing pre-COVID. It's going to take time. So this is possibly not the right time. But in a few months, when we get over this immediate problem of the virus and production volumes can pick up and labor again comes back and we are nearer the way of working as it used to be, at that time, I think gradually the government needs to look at the whole question of how to increase the demand. And, some of our experts say that demand should be increased by reducing income tax. That's not going to solve the problem. Because if you reduce the income tax of everybody, people will go and spend money on various different things. Whereas what you want is the expenditure to be focused on manufactured goods. For that, the correct answer is reduce the price to the customer of manufactured goods. So government reduces taxes. The companies also have a big responsibility for reducing costs of production. And in reducing costs of production, the management has a big role to play, which I've dealt with in the book, as to what all management can do to improve productivity, to improve their supply chains, to reduce waste, to reduce overheads, reduce salaries, don't live an opulent way, put that money back into the company. All of those things are there. Plus, there are a number of areas where government adds to cost of production. For example, many inputs which are supplied to industry are charged at a higher rate than their price to other consumers. You take electricity, is the biggest. The cost of electricity for industry is the highest. For agriculture and for domestic people, it's the lowest. In Delhi, lots of people get free electricity. Where does the difference in cost come from? Industry. So you're actually increasing the cost of production of industry, making industry non-competitive. And what is the purpose you're achieving? You don't get growth, you don't get taxation, you don't get employment growing. So some of these policies need to be looked at. The whole question of time delays, I think any industrialist you will talk to, they will tell you the kind of delays they've experienced in various things in doing business, in setting up a business, in operating a business. Now, in government, till not so very recently, government didn't even pay interest for delays. If government owed me 1,000 rupees, and when they gave it to me, maybe after 2 years, they didn't give any interest because they thought time didn't matter. But actually, time in India is much more costly than in the developed world, because our interest rates are several times the interest rate in these countries. So it costs money, which somehow, I don't know why, government doesn't realize that time costs money. Industry becomes uncompetitive if you delay things. Payments. The delays of getting money from government for work done for government or for products supplied to government, where there's no question of anything, is well known to everybody. And in many companies, they provide an extra cushion for payment from government. Now, what good does this do? It makes your costs higher. Government pays more because people jack up prices to compensate for the delay which is happening. Increases cost of production, reduces competitiveness. Now, some of these things also need to be understood. And when Mr. Modi's programs have not made the kind of progress they should, these are some of the reasons which obviously Mr. Modi cannot handle all this himself. It has to be done by the civil servants in the center, more importantly in the states, because most of these things happen in the states, not in the center.
So is it because the bureaucracy is not managing?
Bureaucrats don't understand the importance of this. But there's another reason also. Over that 40 years socialistic thing which we had, 1950 to 1991, all bureaucrats, and I was one of them, so I know it firsthand, we were brought up and trained to think that private sector was not to be trusted. That private sector were exploiters of the people. That profit making was really, in a sense, doing injustice to the common man. That industry shouldn't make so much profit, and the private sector was making too much profit. This whole licensing policy which came in that period, it showed enormous distrust of the private sector people, and the need to keep them under tight control. Everything was controlled so rigidly, it's unbelievable that even if you produced more than your licensed capacity, it was a criminal offense. To produce became a criminal offense. Now that attitude is in the minds of the civil servants. And it's not gone away completely. Why should it go away? So civil servants are not today people who facilitate the private sector business. They, in fact, act again as controllers rather than as facilitators. Whereas industrial growth can happen, as I said, if you create an India incorporated, which means government and the industrialists, entrepreneurs, have to work together as one team to bring about competitive manufacturing for the good of the nation. Because I think what people need to understand, Ramya, is this, that if industry grows in India, and I start with an industry which makes 1,000 units, and this 1,000 becomes 1 million, and I, being the shareholder, become rich because of that, I'm still in India. The wealth which is created is in India, it's not going away anywhere. And that is how India will develop. If there's one unit which has grown from 1,000 to 1 million, and lots of units like this grow, lots of people become rich, lots of people will get work. And that is how the country will become rich. So distrusting private sector, which of course Mr. Modi and his ministers have been saying is wrong, but it's not gone down the line. That still remains somewhat limited in its impact. That is something people need to understand.
Because also because of the lavish lifestyles of promoters and the the whole siphoning of money from companies into their own personal use.
Absolutely. See, this is one of the huge evils which crept into our system, primarily because of the license Raj, where everything had to be done by a license, which means the government minister, bureaucrat had to approve either giving you a license or increasing the production quantity in your license or making some modification and saying that instead of making of this specification, you can improve the specification. All of that had to be done by government, along with which there was the need for political funding. And I think it's no secret, everybody knows. The bulk of political funding was all done by black money. Now, where did black money come from? Black money came, partly at least, from people siphoning money out of industry, which meant a lot of people had to be corrupted. And the person who was taking black money out of the company, firstly, he weakened the company. Because if you take money out of the company's balance sheet becomes much weaker. It doesn't have money to invest in new technology, modernization, growth, R&D, nothing. Plus, when you get this kind of black money, which you can't put in the bank, which you can't invest openly because there's no accounting for it, then you use it for all kinds of wasteful consumption. And that's what you've seen happening in India, that there was so much of this kind of wasteful consumption. It's now become really quite shameful. The kind of people where they celebrate weddings and engagements and birthdays and all kinds of things. That has brought a huge amount of distrust between bureaucrats, with politicians, and with the public. Nobody trusts either the politician or the bureaucrats because they say the entrepreneur, the industrialist, they corrupt the bureaucrat, they corrupt the politician, which to some extent was quite true. It's a little bit different now as far as the central government is concerned because it's clean. But it wasn't always so. And this distrust is another factor which needs to change, because if you have distrust in a system, everything is going to get delayed and the right decision will not get taken for a long time. You can't be competitive. So again, if you want to become competitive, distrust has to go. So when you are asking that what has gone wrong, even in Mr. Modi's time, these are some of the things which have gone wrong, is required to be corrected. And I'm hoping that I've raised some of these issues in the book. I'm hoping that somebody will have a look at these and some action will happen.
So, is raising import duties a good way of going about making India competitive? Is it, conceptually, what do you think of it?
Economists will never say that raising duties is a good way. Because if you raise duties, then in a way you're giving scope to the local manufacturer to be less efficient, because he has a margin of the import duties plus the transport costs from abroad. Sometimes it is necessary to put import duties for a very limited period of time when a new industry is coming up. For a nascent industry, some little protection for 2-3 years is required, in which time that industry should get its act together. But for that, again, all the other factors which I just said lead to increase in cost must be corrected. Government should not lead to higher costs. You take a public sector. A lot of inputs are controlled by the public sector. Most of the public sector companies are non-competitive. I won't say all, but most of them. In any case, there are no criteria which one can independently observe, which will show that the public sector production is the most efficient possible. It isn't. If it was, then these companies wouldn't be making losses, they wouldn't be requiring state support, they would be generating a lot of internal resources and growing on their own. But they come to government for capital investment also. So they make Indian manufacturing uncompetitive. So that's when the industry says, give us protection. But that protection then continues forever because these inefficiencies of the system don't go away.
Do you think the government should fasten the whole privatization of these public sector units? We have many, right, who are in the manufacturing.
I think that in the Indian situation, given our democracy, given our constitution and the legal system, and the way the whole system works, public sector in India cannot ever be efficient or competitive. And if we want to become a globally competitive manufacturing hub, we have to get rid of this inefficiency in the system, because the public sector has a significant cost in the cost of manufacturing of the private sector. Infrastructure, ports, a lot of materials, electricity, so many things. So it's necessary, because you can't become globally competitive. People will not come to India to invest with all these inefficiencies in the system. So there are big, drastic changes which are required. I believe that this COVID pandemic has given us an opportunity to relook at our entire systems, all our policies, and start afresh. And I think we have a leader today who's capable of doing that. I think Mr. Modi has that vision, that understanding, which will and can find the right answers to make us competitive.
Provided
But
they're
he needs support.
right.
And therefore, the bureaucracy has to understand some of these things. They have to get more savvy in terms of what is business competitive and how to achieve it.
Right. Do you think should there be a greater private sector participation in the policy making process, and it should not be just left to like bureaucrats who are now generalized rather than specialized?
I think if the distrust of the private sector would go away, and that can go away if the private sector industrialists, and especially leaders of the private sector industry, become role models for others to follow. They show by their conduct, their actions, that they're running the industry for the benefit of the nation. They're following the highest ethical standards. They shun all opulence. And they try and create good teamwork in their companies. I think that will win the trust. And I think good policy making does require that the government side should hear and give some weightage to the views of the private sector. If the private sector gives views only to get their personal benefit, which happens very often incidentally today, in most representations to government, you'll find people saying, reduce this, reduce that, give me this free, give me this subsidy. That's not the way to do it. You have to look at what would be good for industry as a whole, what would be good for the nation as a whole. There's no reason why private sector industry should not also think of the nation. Why should it be a monopoly of the government, only government people to think of the nation? It's our country as much as the bureaucrats and the civil servants. Why can't I think of the nation also? Because ultimately, Ramya, what is good for the nation is going to be good for me, and vice versa.
Right. So, a lot of states, because of the pandemic and subsequent problems, many states have brought in labor reforms. What is your take on it? Many say that, the reforms that have been brought in by states are extreme in nature and do not really protect the rights of the workers.
This is a very interesting question, and I have a view which is, I think, different from almost most people in. The current labor laws and the thinking about labor management relationships have developed over the last 200-300 years, ever since the Industrial Revolution started in England. And they were based on the capitalists exploiting the labor to maximize profits for the capitalist class. That's how the whole industrial system started. Those were days when there was hardly any competition, either within the country and certainly not global competition. Now, the world has changed over time. And if you look at the current world, okay, we again seem to be slipping back into some amount of protectionism. But fundamentally, it's a fairly open global economy. The benefits of international trade and the benefits of people trading goods, trading people, capital moving across, investing in other countries are well recognized. Now you look at an industry and the labor. What is the fundamental requirement for labor working in an industry to be able to get security of employment, to be able to get better remuneration, better living conditions, better quality of life over time? The only answer to that is the industry which employs that labor must have the means. That means it must grow, it must make profit, and it must have surpluses after meeting investment, R&D, other needs, to also put money into benefiting the employees, including labor. If industry doesn't do that, if industry doesn't make money, that means if industry becomes less than competitive, where will the labor benefit from? Government today cannot subsidize industry. The only thing which happens if industry becomes uncompetitive, ultimately it goes bankrupt. People lose their jobs. So it is in the interest of the workers today that their company, their employer, remains as competitive as possible. And if he is competitive, he'll be profitable, he will grow. Because competitiveness goes with profit and growth. So workers are should be much more concerned about the competitiveness of the industry. How does that happen? If workers and managements are adversaries, as has been historically the labor situation, you will not get competitiveness, because if two sides are fighting, the result will never be as much if both were pulling in the same direction. And this has been proven. The whole of Japanese industry became competitive, despite not having any natural resources, despite not having energy sources. And their manufacturing, whether it's automobiles or ships or steel, became so competitive that countries like America had to put quotas on Japanese cars, because locally produced cars in America, who had all these resources, they could still not compete with a car made 7,000 miles away. And it is because workers and managements worked as a team. So the value of working together is demonstrated in Japan. When we started Maruti, we were a private company, a public sector company. We realized that if we worked like public sector companies work in India, we would also perform like public sector companies. We decided to follow the Japanese system. And in Maruti, we have the same relationship with workers. There's a single union, no outsiders, no political affiliations, nothing. Management and union work in harmony with each other to how to benefit the company. Both workers and the company have benefited as a result. Maruti has remained the most competitive manufacturer till now. How many companies in India today have grown without borrowing, without raising capital, from 1 lakh production to 15 lakh? 15 times we have grown, without all from internal resources. And we have cash balance of 37,000 crores. How many companies have that in India? And why has that happened? Only because the productivity and efficiency of management in Maruti, because of workers working with management, is that high. Every year, the workers make suggestions and improvements, which save us something between 300 and 350 crores.
And is it also because, you became from a public sector company, you became entirely a private sector company, obviously giving you greater, decision-making powers?
Yes, we were public sector, we became private sector, but the work culture remained the same. And that work culture came in when we were actually public sector. And despite all the government laws and everything, we didn't need the government labor laws never came in the way. So for entrepreneurs to say that labor laws prevent us becoming productivity is a lot of rubbish.
And so my last question, when do you see this, manufacturing share in GDP going to 25%? Obviously, it's not happening in 2022.
I wish I could answer that question. It depends how quickly we all of us, government, which means politicians, which means bureaucracy, which means opposition parties, because this is a national effort. It's not a Mr. Modi effort or anybody like that. And in making India an industrialized country should be the objective of every person in this country. This should not be an agenda which should require politicking. There should be agreement. And if that happens quickly, I think you can see a difference happening in India, a visible difference within 5 years. You know, it didn't take China or Korea or Japan too many years to become from a destroyed country to a pretty good manufacturing country.
Right.
But we need some national consensus on these issues. We need big changes happening.
Right, sir. Got it. Thank you so much, sir, for taking our time.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And all the best for your book, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.